Good evening, St. Lucia, and welcome to the Information Command Center here at the studios of the Government Information Service National Television Network. I am Lucia Joseph. Want to say thank you to our media partners who are also joining us for this important update to the nation. On Friday, we experienced the battering of Hurricane Elsa, which came at us as a Category 1 storm. We'll be discussing St. Lucia post-Hurricane Elsa, but most importantly, St. Lucia and its resilience. How are we building a new St. Lucia with resilience at the core? To discuss that with us this evening, we have the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Honorable Alan Chasney. We also have the Minister for Infrastructure, Ports and Energy, Honorable Stevenson King, as well as the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries, Natural Resources and Cooperatives, Honorable Ezekiel Joseph. Just to put some into perspective for you, St. Lucia did record one related death to Hurricane Elsa, and a 58-year-old resident of Port Saint Jacques Soufrière, Peter Victor. In the passage of Hurricane Elsa, well, lots of wind involved there, and I do know that several colleagues were talking about how frightening the winds were, and we've never experienced that, some of us not in our lifetime, how strong the winds were. So the wind severely damaged homes, buildings. We had roofs and wooden structures that were completely destroyed as a result. We also experienced impact to our electricity and telecommunications, as well as water utilities. We also had some of our road network receiving some minimal damage, as well as trees and branches falling and creating some other damage in St. Lucia. To be able to unpack all of that for us, I now invite our panel to discuss with us where is St. Lucia at this time. Prime Minister, I invite you to give us an update as to where we are at.
Thank you very much, Elsa. Yesterday afternoon, we were able to get reports from several of the ministries, headed first of all by NEMO, followed by the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Infrastructure, and the Ministry of Education, and also the Ministry of Equity. I can say that the greatest amount of damage was really in the agricultural sector from a financial perspective. It's estimated that we've lost almost $34 million worth of crops, which is really your plantains and bananas, but the minister could speak more specifically to that. The Ministry of Education, there were several schools in which the roofs were damaged, as well as the CDC buildings. 8 of the buildings, the roofs were badly damaged, but 13 buildings were impacted altogether. In terms of individual households, we're still doing a full assessment. I believe the teams are still on the ground, determining how many homes were actually impacted. And we've gotten from different constituencies, obviously you would appreciate different numbers so far, but I'm hoping that by tomorrow, Monday, that would receive a more accurate update on the number of households specifically that have been hindered. We have received word from CRIF, which is the catastrophic insurance program that we have, that the numbers that they have received so far, that we're not going to be expecting a significant payout from them, more than likely just the deductible that we have, which is about $130,000 US. So it means that the Ministry of Finance is already looking for ways to reallocate existing funds to be able to assist in getting the Ministry of Agriculture back on track again, and certainly working with the Ministry of Infrastructure in dealing with some immediate needs. And really the big one would really be the Ministry of Education, and through the Ministry of Equity, some of the individual households, particularly to the more vulnerable persons in our society. This is early in the year, and sadly we still have an entire hurricane season to go. And this caught us mid-track of our desilting program. Luckily for us, there was not a lot of rainfall in this particular system, but we are continuing to prepare ourselves for the remainder of the season. Again, I want to join you, Elsa, and giving my condolences to the family in Fontaine-Jacques, Victor, who lost his life in the storm. I know that this must be also very difficult for the persons in Fontaine-Jacques who already had suffered significantly during the hurricane in Thomas. And I think that Minister King and myself and Ezekiel all remember that all too well. And I'm sure it's still in the minds of many people in Fontaine-Jacques as to what happened to them. So my sincere condolences to the family and also to the community of Fontaine-Jacques.
Thank you very much for that, Prime Minister. As you indicated, of course, the agriculture sector was most impacted by Hurricane Elsa. But so before we get to Minister Ezekiel Joseph, who may have quite a lion's share of the time to speak on that in the opening, we'll go across to Minister Stephenson King. Minister, for our St. Lucia's infrastructure, there's been so much emphasis placed on moving forward, how we building, and the Prime Minister did mention the resilience. In terms of our infrastructure holding up at this time, Category 1, but as we indicated, the winds were very, very ferocious. So as you received the reports and even going out and seeing the damage, were you satisfied that the work that we have done thus far has been able to put St. Lucia in good stead?
Thank you very much, Lisa, and let me take this opportunity to extend my condolences to the family out at Fontaine-Jacques who lost a loved one. We must say thank God that it's only one who succumbed. But today I think it is an opportune moment for us to assess and analyze the resilience of our infrastructure, particularly our road infrastructure on the island, and to see how we fared out with this Category 1 hurricane. Obviously, it was one not of much rain, but rather heavy winds, and hence the reason why the agricultural sector records the most severe damage, and of course the lion's share of the potential expenditure to resuscitate and reinstate the industry. In infrastructure, what we have seen is minimal damage. The preliminary estimates on the damage caused by Elsa is $714,255. But from a very strategic standpoint, we are rounding that figure to $1 million because it's preliminary, what we have done so far in terms of our rapid assessment. It is likely that there are issues that we may not have picked up in the initial assessment. There will be damage that we will find that we have not picked up, and so we're looking at $1 million in damage throughout the country. The fact is, most of what we have seen is really as a consequence of fallen trees, fallen utility poles, etc., which has inflicted some minimal damage. But particularly what we are called upon after Elsa is the cleanup of the flooding, the fallen trees, to clear the carriageway and to make the environment motorable and cleaner to the satisfaction of the entire population. But this in itself indicates one thing, and that is our resilience, climate resilience. Are we resilient enough? No, we are not. We've still got a long way to go. There's need for us to look at what we are doing in terms of the engineering and structural measures in terms of resilience. And we also have to look at the bioengineering measures to help improve the road condition. And oftentimes I speak of the road conditions as not just merely the carriageway, but the carriageway, the shoulders, the drains, and the environment. What sort of environment are we facilitating our road infrastructure? And therefore, in our new approaches, that we are developing within the Ministry of Infrastructure, we are taking very seriously the issue of resilience to climate change. You would recognize in the most recent program of the Ministry of Infrastructure, which is the RIMP 4, in terms of the road designs, and what we are seeing emerging is not just a carriageway, but we're looking at stronger pavement strengths that will take us probably 15 and 20 years before any destruction, pavement strengths that can withstand the category 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes. We're looking at drainage systems that can withstand those sort of phenomena. And we're also looking at pedestrian, because really the road infrastructure is really an element, a factor of production, which speaks to production in terms of transportation, movement of people, movement of goods, movement of services. And so you have to take that into consideration, so that with a phenomena, in this case a category 1, but let's say a category 5, that notwithstanding that you'd have been able to deal with the issue of flooding and of course arresting any potential paralysis that may cause in terms of movement of people and movement of goods and services and transportation generally. And that is what we are factoring into our new designs, building a national standard of a national code of construction for our road infrastructure. You'll also notice that we're building roads now with sidewalks to facilitate the movement of people, proper bus laybys to bring in the element of road safety, and protecting the verges and protecting the cliffs and other areas which pose danger to our people by installing barriers, safety barriers for our people. As we speak now, it is indeed a timely moment, because we are now at this time engaged in the construction of the cul-de-sac bridge, the new cul-de-sac bridge, which really is, I must say, a gift from the Japanese as a consequence of Tropical Storm Thomas in 2010. And that bridge has been designed with the element of resilience. What we saw in 2010 was a flooding of the cul-de-sac basin. We saw the movement of people paralyzed. The north couldn't communicate with the south, and the south to the north. And so for more than 48 hours, we did have a situation where the country couldn't function in its normal manner. What the bridge is bringing into focus is not just a new bridge to replace the old bridge, but a better bridge that is longer, the span is wider, and even the passageway, the channel of the cul-de-sac river is being retrained so as to improve the hydraulics, the speed at which water can move under that bridge into the cul-de-sac bay, and to avert the possibility of flooding. Also, the element of the furniture that is going to be put in there, the berms, to prevent the overflowing of the banks of the river. So this in itself is indeed an achievement and an advancement towards meeting our goals for climate resilience in infrastructure. And finally, we noticed throughout the country, because of the heavy rainfalls and the impact, we noticed a number of utility poles being knocked down throughout the country. And that in itself is probably one major element in climate resilience in infrastructure. How do you continue to build infrastructure that can protect your utility lines? Of course, you need utility for electricity, for communication, and for services generally. And therefore, in new construction of road infrastructure, we now need to say, how do we build to protect the utility services? And the answer to this is being able to build on the ground with stronger pavements, with the necessary ducting of the lines, and therefore, if we are able to protect our land in terms of protecting land, the potential of land slippage, then it means that we would have been able to deal with the issue of damage to the utility infrastructure.
All right, thank you so much, then, Minister, for that. You made several points that we'll be able to go back to and expand on. And I want to invite Minister Ezekiel Joseph, responsible for agriculture. And as you heard in the opening, the agriculture sector, very, very hard hit. And Minister, I would dare say that it's almost reminiscent of Tropical Storm Cook, if I'm not mistaken, where we wasn't so much rain-driven, but very wind-driven. Give us an understanding of what the damage is for our farmers.
Well, let me start by saying good night to all our listeners, and I'm happy to be here with the Honorable Prime Minister and my colleague Minister, Honorable Stephen King. I'm sitting on there and I'm reminiscing, Lisa, and I can say that I've had the responsibility as Minister of Agriculture, working with both Minister King as the Honorable Prime Minister and now Minister Shastny as the Prime Minister, to go to these Prime Ministers to seek support for farmers after they experience negative impact of climate change. Today we are speaking about Hurricane Elsa, but we all would appreciate that any significant changes in climate would affect agriculture, flooding, high temperature. In case of our experience now, the heavy winds we experienced on Friday. Like the Honorable Prime Minister said in his opening remarks, the preliminary figure that we're looking at is over $36 million, and that's preliminary, because we had to do a rapid response assessment come Saturday morning to Saturday afternoon, so at least we could have given the Honorable Prime Minister some indication as to the impact. We are meeting tomorrow, that's the ministry, meeting tomorrow with all the heads, because following that assessment, we went back on the ground to do a more comprehensive analysis as to the impact. And of course, at that meeting tomorrow, we will be able to give a more accurate indication as to the impact. But unfortunately, I am agreeing that the sector that was hardly hit is agriculture. The banana industry, our plantain farmers, the livestock industry is also hit, and a lot of farmers lost their pen. Our greenhouse farmers then got severely damaged. Our fisher folks also, some of them got impacted negatively. So the situation is one that when we speak about resilience in agriculture, and I remember sometime in 2018, Prime Minister, when we had that experience, and we spoke about, look, we need to see how we can develop an agriculture that can be resilient to climate change. And coming out of that experience, we started with the support of the government of Taiwan, establishing windbreaks, because what we realized, especially in the case of our farmers who are engaged in banana production, what we realized that those areas where we have windbreaks, where we have trees barring the cultivation, the damage is minimal. So that is an indication that there is need for us to see how we can encourage our farmers, those of course who are where we can, because not everywhere we'll be able to, but where we can, to encourage them, and some of them have already started buying into it, because I can tell you for the past 2 years we have established a lot of windbreaks. Unfortunately, one would appreciate that these trees takes time to grow, so you will not see an immediate impact as to what we are doing now, but we will continue to do this. I'm sure the other area we're looking at, we spoke about the whole question of CRIF, but what we have been discussing is the whole aspect of insurance. How can we come up with an insurance policy or a program that would be able to create that cushion after our farmers have experienced some negative impact as it pertains to climate change. We have had discussions, we have had some trials. In fact, we all coming out of the the wind crop experience, where our banana farmers will given coverage under the wind crop experience. So we have had the experience where the insurance policies, so long as implemented in a manner that would be beneficial to the farmers, would create that safety net. But it's something we have to continue discussing, and in our journey, continuing our journey, is something we have to look at seriously. What can be done? I know I've had discussions with some companies, but it's for us to continue that discussion. But definitely, what we have seen is the whole aspect of windbreak can cause or can support or reduce, that's what I'm for, can reduce the impact of heavy winds.
So, Minister, the insurance, absolutely critical issue. What then for the government? How can you buffer the effects for farmers at this time, particularly within the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Elsa?
Well, I would not be in a position now to give an indication as to what our intentions would be.
Are there any existing programs that can be activated to perhaps?
Well, we have right now with the support of the Taiwanese and of course with the support of the banana program. In fact, we had a program where we're going to give support to inputs to our farmers. But now that we experience that situation, we have to go back on the drawing board and look at what can be done. We have had some ideas, we have had some discussions over the past 2 days, but it's for us now to finalize it and make a presentation to the cabinet tomorrow, God willing. So at least when we go out there, we know exactly what we are going to offer our farmers. And of course, the resources would be available. And you hear what PM said. Unfortunately, the aspect of CRIF, we have not seen the type of returns we would expect. But unfortunately, we would have to see where we can get resources to give support to our farmers. It's definitely, they would need that type of support.
Now, this damage definitely affects the overall economy because banana, with all of its problems, still is a good contributor to the local economy in terms of the market being able to export, and we know that has taken this hit. Can you explain to the nation how much of a setback every rain event, tropical storm, hurricane, the effects, how those effects set back the industry and the wider economy?
Well, I sat in my living room before my roof went when I heard it was upgraded to a Category 1 hurricane on Friday morning. I said, we will have a challenge. Because we all know of the situation of Windfresh, and we have been getting some good support from FIVES, and we have been getting some good feedback. Of course, we have jumped a lot of hurdles. We have getting some good feedback from some of the major supermarkets. In fact, what they are saying just last week, we were told that they are saying that there's need for an increase in our export, because for the past weeks, we were exporting on a weekly basis, on average, 5,000 boxes a week, and they were asking whether we can increase that. So we are just put in place a program of $4.5 million, Lisa, to give support to our banana farmers, right? As far as what we can do to operate in the new dispensation. That is a new dispensation, Windfresh not being there, what we can do locally, and of course in the UK to support our farmers. The good thing that is going for us is that there is a demand for the bananas. Now with that hurricane, I'm sure there will be a lot of disappointments, both locally and of course at the UK level, because the mere fact that there were an interest in wanting to see an increase in our weekly export, and now with almost 80-85% of the sector being badly damaged, it will take some time for us to recover. So it's for us now to see how we can engage these individuals, to hear from them what will be their position as far as their intention moving forward. But it's going to definitely affect our farmers, and that's why I believe there's need for us as quickly as possible, since we had that $4.5 million for the banana industry already in place. It's for us to see how we can reprioritize what we are going to do and what our support that we're going to give. But in the coming week, during the coming week, we will be able to articulate in a more positive way the areas that we will be supporting our farmers. Not only about banana farmers, but agricultural farmers generally.
Let's talk about our fishers. I know sometimes not much is heard about them, but they too get affected. In terms of effects from Elsa, any damage there, whether it be to fishing vessels or landing sites and so forth?
Well, we got some reports, like I said, preliminary, that some fishermen lost a boat, some engine got damaged, so it's within our assessment. And like I said in my opening remarks, the fishermen also got affected. Livestock farmers got affected, vegetable farmers got affected, but the impact was more on our banana farmers.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Minister. The Prime Minister, in terms of financing, and we can't escape that, because you mentioned that with CRIF, we're not getting any big payout to talk about Minister King mentioned the cost in terms of continually having to rebuild what has been built and even to improve on what that existing infrastructure was. We have been, or certainly you've been on the international stage, definitely trying to push the point for the global community to understand the sort of situation that countries like St. Lucia, the rest of SIDS, are finding themselves in each time a hurricane season comes around. How much of inroad have we made on the international scene with regard to being able to access concessionary financing?
I have to say that the efforts that we've been making for the last couple of years, coupled with the hurricanes in 2017 and also the hurricane in 2019 in Bahamas, that we have seen some movement at the World Bank level with what's called the IDA funds. We received about $8 million or $15 million every 3 years, about $5 million a year. That number was recently increased to about $60 million. And that money was being allocated specifically for resilience building. And while we're extremely grateful, some of our brothers and sisters in the region whose per capita GDP are in excess of the nominal amount don't get access to those monies. Antigua, St. Kitts, and Barbados, just to name a few. And certainly a fair amount of SIDS per capita GDP is also past the threshold. And you would ask, why does St. Lucia take an interest in that? Because really in a couple of years, we will also pass that threshold. So while we're the beneficiary right now, we need to keep advocating for what's going to happen in the future. And I think that Minister King brought up the most interesting point. And that is, every dollar we invest before a hurricane takes place saves us about $8. So what does that mean? If you don't invest in resilience and you have a catastrophic event like what just happened to us, the cost is 8 times much more. Now, if you look at making that investment up front, sadly, the investment you're making is almost like an insurance in itself in reducing the overall level of impact. So a good example is the bridge in cul-de-sac. If we had to pay for the bridge ourselves, and we're only paying for about 10%, so 10% of the total cost of the bridge came from St. Lucia resources, 90% came in the form of a grant from Japan. That's not normal. Normally we're being asked to borrow that money. When you invest in the bridge that's wider and higher, it's not carrying any more cars. But what it's doing is certainly helping in building resilience in the country. Putting utility wires, and I think Minister King was making reference to that, underground. And we've seen just with a Category 1 hurricane, the impact that had on our utility wires. And it could have been obviously much worse. That doesn't cause the electricity to go any faster or phone calls to go any better. So these are sunk costs, which is what we call them financially, that will not produce any immediate return. The return only happens when the catastrophe happens and that you're saving the money. But as a small island developing state, the larger countries who set the rules, traditionally and still today, do not want to make exceptions in the international macroeconomic rules. And so it's been a very difficult task ahead. Understanding that this government chose to take matters in its own hand and not make any excuses. And the $1.50 gas tax that we've implemented has allowed us to raise about $30 million a year. And we're using that money, initially it was invested into the Ministry of Infrastructure because there were some immediate needs in the first 2 years. And then we've been using it now to leverage, to borrow more money on. So this is where the $400 million in the road development program has come from, is by allocating this money towards it. And what we have found out, in fact, Minister King and I were meeting earlier today and we were discussing that. What we have found out is by us taking the lead and finding the resources to start, the development agencies now are much more willing to come in after the fact. We've seen it with the airport, we've seen it with some of our road projects. But the reality is, from a financial perspective, Lisa, it's still debt. And debt is necessary, but it has to be done where the investment that you're making with your debt expenditure is improving the overall level of capacity. So we are restricted on how much money we can invest. I think Sir John used to say there's two types of investments. There's balls and there's boxes. And he says, a ball rolls and creates economic activity. When you invest in a box, it stands still and there's no turnover from it. And so you have to find a way to make sure that you have a balance between balls and boxes when you're moving forward. Ezekiel used the term insurance. And what's insurance? Insurance is a way of setting aside some monies every day for a rainy day. If you do it by yourself, if you try to create your own pool of monies to wait for that rainy day, the amount of money that you're going to have to keep aside is much greater. If everybody makes a contribution collectively, the expectation is not everybody is going to be impacted simultaneously, and therefore the portion that each person has to set aside is much less. So the $1.50 is a way of us putting some insurance in play. Persons taking out insurance, your own home insurance. Banks today are not going to lend you money unless you have hurricane insurance. If we're not building to a particular standard, then the insurance goes up because the hurricanes are having a more severe impact. Government understands that. Government recognizes that we have to play a much more significant role in investing in the infrastructure of this country to allow insurances to operate. I mean, we were all very scared after the hurricanes in Dominica and in Barbuda and St. Kitts and some of the other islands, that in fact we were reaching the point that we would be uninsurable. So St. Lucia, in a very short period of time, has been able to move forward significantly. The roads, the drains, the monies we've gotten from the DVRP, which are World Bank monies we're getting from CDB, all of those have been now investing. What we're advocating for on a global basis is either for more grant money or that the monies that we're borrowing to build resilience are not part of our balance sheet and don't count towards our debt to GDP. We're going to be agreeing to repay them, because what we're saying to the developed world, the more money we have to invest in our own resilience, and remember that resilience is coming out of global warming, of which we play no part. We can't control our destiny solely by changing our behavior. The 43 SIDS in the world only emit 0.5% of the carbon emissions in the world. So our behavior can't influence change. The developed world has to change. And we're saying that they are the net emitters and that they should be making more concessionary and in fact grant monies available to us to really deal with the situation. So the new financial structure we're putting in place, the economic fund that we have with CIP, allowing those monies to go in for rainy days, the gas tax that we've put in, the fiscal discipline that we're trying to establish in the country, and we want to be able to build up a reserve of about $500 million so that when we have, like the experience we had with COVID, the epidemic, that we have a reserve of monies available to us that we don't have to go into further debt. There is no forgiveness on the thresholds of debt. And as much as we as a government would like to spend more money on improving all of our infrastructure immediately, we have to make some very difficult decisions, and there's some tough choices. So putting utility wires under the ground right now is a luxury, because we would have to wait off. If we put the utilities wires underground, we would have less money to spend on more roads. So the first thing is really to improve the drains around the island, slope stabilization around the island, because we saw what happened in Thomas, in Soufrière, and its environs. We have a new program called National Infrastructure Program that is looking holistically at the country and trying to determine where new communities should go. So in fact, there are communities currently that really, if you were to do an analysis, they shouldn't be where they are. they are in a very vulnerable location. And what has happened is we've allowed people to make the decision where the new communities are coming. So we have to take a much more proactive approach towards building roads and infrastructure in areas of the island that we are less vulnerable moving forward, but at the same time trying to marry that productivity. So I've said a mouthful, I'll stop at that point, but this is a complicated issue. There are many moving parts, and the fact that we don't have enough resources of our own continuously makes us dependent on the international agencies. And with the international agencies, there's empathy on the climate change issue, but there is no empathy on the financial viability side of it. And that's what we're trying to work with.
And I know, Minister King, you had that experience firsthand when we were hit with Thomas. And as Prime Minister, when we came off with that final assessment, and I think we must have been in the range of nearly $1 billion, first of all, we were just staggered by what that cost was. But the response from the financing agencies, the inordinate time that it took for St. Lucia to be able to access funds, to be able to address all of the impacts from Thomas. Coming out of that experience and holding the portfolio for infrastructure, what are some of the experiences, the lessons learned then that you were able to apply within the ministry to enable it to have that capacity to respond, as well as to negotiate and perhaps navigate the international agencies?
I think one of the first lessons learned out of Thomas was the need for quick response, immediate response on our part, in terms of not sitting back and waiting for the international agencies to respond, but getting out there and doing the initial cleanup and demonstrating our own commitment to self-help and cleanup. I think I saw a bit of that taking place in the last 2 days throughout the country, where communities came out, individuals came out and started the initial clean out to ensure that there was movement as far as transportation is concerned. For us out of Thomas, it was reaching out to those international organizations who entrusted us with the responsibility of doing our own assessments and being able to evaluate it and then making that determination for support to St. Lucia. Of course, that was coupled with the level of grant aid that came in, the assistance, the aid that came in from other countries. And I spoke earlier on of the Japanese bridge in cul-de-sac, which is being proved today, costing some 42 million EC dollars. Now, if you just consider 42 million EC dollars, if the country were to be called upon to meet that cost, plus other areas which were considered by the World Bank, DVRP, and up to 2016, there were projects under the DVRP which were still pending. In fact, as we speak now, there are still projects being considered under the DVRP. So it has taken an awful long time. It has protracted over a period of time, and so it shows that the country has the capacity of doing the initial activities, the initial interventions, and then holding on to the international agencies to do the broader things. We saw the UK under the UK CIF, which is the United Kingdom Infrastructure Development Fund, coming forward based on our own priority, even while we thought that, hey, what really and truly the UK was looking for were really new infrastructure projects, but they were really looking for infrastructure projects that would further bolster the economic engine of the country and to broaden the capacity of the country as far as its economics is concerned. So the investment based on our own recommendation to look at the Millennium and West Coast Highway really was a deliberate one, in that we saw the West Coast being a main economic tributary in the country, a main economic corridor in the country, and by developing that corridor we would see greater economic activity. That project is also on. It will tie into the bridge, the cul-de-sac bridge. So the first phase will start off very soon with the Millennium Highway from Fuasho into the cul-de-sac basin, and then the Japanese bridge, the cul-de-sac bridge, which is 141 meters wide or long, will then link to the next phases, the other two phases of the West Coast Road. So for us, it's a tremendous experience in terms of having been faced with the hurricane, and then to be able to link with the international agencies, understanding our plight, but also willing to work with us in meeting the objective of resilience, as we say.
I think that St. Lucians perhaps, but perhaps with the experience of Thomas, having the country separated, if you will, and having bridges down and so forth, the people not being able to move around. I don't necessarily think that we keep in mind how important that connectivity is and keeping the economy circular, keeping it moving. So I don't necessarily think that at all times we think about that, how our road infrastructure really energizes and keeps the economy moving.
Well, you know, during Thomas, we saw it.
Yes.
The Bois Bridge went down. The Choc Bridge went down. Soufriere was completely isolated. And even the PI Bridge also went down. It was a catastrophe. And I remember heavy traffic having to go on the back roads. And it was then that I understood how weak our back roads were. One day of that heavy traffic going by, homes nearby were shaking, roads were sinking, and it was becoming impassable. And that's why the work that Minister King is doing right now, and a lot of persons just see roads and sometimes don't appreciate how they're coordinated. So the improvement from Union and the straightening of that S road, connecting to Corinth, connecting to Grand Riviere, connecting to Corinth, eventually the redevelopment or the rebuilding of the Vésiqué Road, which now brings you to La Tourette Road, are very important, because now by strengthening and putting the sidewalks, persons are more encouraged to use those roads, and if we have any incidents, that they're strong enough to deal with the weight of some of the commercial activity. That's very visible on the Bardil. We've seen the recent compromise that we had even before Elsa. We know that medium term, that the long-awaited tunnel through Bardil has to come. Because the more the economy grows, the more strength that you have in the south and the north, that becomes a critical artery, which is vulnerable. During Thomas, it was closed almost for, 6 weeks? We were taking passengers from Vieux Fort in boats up north for weeks until we could have gotten it reopened. And the economic activity that was curtailed, whether it's farmers, whether it's workers, farmers who couldn't get their produce up to the north. So the new highway along the East Coast, which becomes a proper industrial highway, along with the tunnel through Bardil, this is not a dream. This is absolutely necessary. I mean, if you think of Barbados without the ABC highway, if you think of Jamaica, to those who've had an opportunity to go to Jamaica and see the new highway between Montego Bay and Negril, between Montego Bay and Ocho Rios, and Ocho Rios between and Kingston, significant different. If you've gone to Puerto Rico and you see the highways, you go to America and you see the highways, we need to now have the ambition and get the resources to be able to do that if we're going to really see our country get to the next level. Because you're 100% right. These storms and the frequency in which they come is a significant impediment of doing business. And every day that businesses lose, there's no money to recover those losses. So the work that the Ministry of Infrastructure is currently doing on the back roads, if you look at it, all makes sense. I mean, I know the Dermont Road, your road at La Guerre has been completed, at Piat has been completed. So again, Agar Road coming from the back way. So eventually the idea is that people can come from is it Bexar?
Yeah.
And coming through Adiglo up to Twapitol, connecting now back on the Agar Road, which you can either go to the top of Babino and connect through Laguerre to the Dearmore Road and making it back. So persons could make it to that part of the country without ever getting caught up in the congestion. But those roads have to be significantly strengthened, not only to take individual cars, pedestrian cars, but also commercial traffic, because it's about saving time as well. So it's a mammoth task that we're undertaking in the country. The West Coast Road, I mean, the problem when you get, it's good to get grant money, but the governance in place and how long it takes to draw it out. The money that came from the UK was there when David Cameron was Prime Minister. And we're finally going to see the work commenced. We're still implementing work through DVRP of monies that came in from Thomas, Hurricane Thomas, and projects that were identified from Hurricane Thomas. This is why it's so important to have our own resources available to us, creating our own fiscal space so we can drive that agenda at a much quicker pace, rather than singly being dependent on outside resources. Those outside resources come in afterwards. The airport, the resurfacing of the runway, and also the flood mitigation part of HIA was not initially part of the overall package. But once the financing for the airport was finalized, immediately afterwards the World Bank came in and gave very concessional funds. I think it's 40-year money with a 20-year moratorium at 0.5%, to now support that aspect of the project. So I think that we found a formula, but it still means making significant sacrifices because they're difficult choices. There is not enough resources available from day to day to do everything that we have to do, and it's a matter of now prioritizing what we're going to do. But I'm very proud of the fact that the minister has actually been in charge of almost $1 billion of investment in this country between the airport and the roadworks. The Minister of Agriculture also wears his WASCO hat, and we've made significant inroads in that regard. The inroads that we've made in the Ministry of Health, the inroads that we're making in education, all of these have resilience components to them. And so some persons may not appreciate right now the level of investment that we're making, but certainly if we have a hurricane, a major hurricane, and you see the benefit of that investment, everybody would have a greater appreciation for it then.
I want to ask you, Minister, with regard to the agriculture and sticking with the whole infrastructural development. The farmers themselves are beneficiaries of this. The feeder roads, and I know that some feeder roads were rendered impassable, but work needs to be done there. But in terms of assisting a program ongoing to improve on the feeder roads?
Well, I mean, when we did the assessment for feeder roads, and unfortunately we had that experience with COVID, because we had an allocation of almost $20 million US dollars to start assisting our farmers in improving the farm roads. In fact, we have never undertaken that type of activities for many years now, and like you said, a lot of these roads are in a very deplorable condition. Unfortunately, the Ministry of Finance, I'm not saying the Minister of Finance, the Ministry of
Broad
Finance,
shoulders,
had to repurpose that resources to assist us with our battle as it pertains to COVID. But definitely we have been able to identify the roads. In fact, in some areas we see some movement. Some of the parliamentarians were able to get resources within their allocation to give some support as it pertains to assisting in improving the condition of these roads. Again, coming from a tropical storm we had in 2017,
correct.
We did give some support, but the way it was done, Lisa, it wasn't a situation where the road was properly sealed. We did always compact it, but you would appreciate with heavy rains and trafficking on these roads, it will get back to its deplorable condition. So I'm very optimistic that moving forward, as soon as we can jump the hurdle as it pertains to COVID, and we can see some improvement in our resources. I'm first confident that I have a team that would give priority to assisting our farmers to see how we can improve the agricultural routes. But definitely some work has been done, but what has been done in the past is not something that we can really rely on. But we need to have a more in-depth program with the support of the Ministry of Infrastructure. In fact, they went on the ground and did the analysis. And what we looked at, we looked at almost $1 billion. It's a lot of money, right? So the 20 million US was only part of the allocation to assist us in improving our agricultural routes.
PM, earlier on you made reference to the Citizenship by Investment Program, the CIP, and being able to put funds from the CIP to use for the country. Can you expand on that for us? What do you mean by that?
So the first thing that we did when we came in, remember, it was a very young program, and some of the things that were being attempted we found very early not to be competitive. And then the other thing with CIP programs is that they sadly suffered from bad reputations in the region. So the first thing that we had to do is to really stabilize our CIP program and bring credibility to it. I'm very proud of the fact that this year the US government did not put our CIP program on their Human Rights Watch. So that's a milestone. The second thing is that our CIP program has grown from strength to strength. And this year so far has been one of the best years. And one of the things that we have done is created what's called an economic fund. So when the new citizen is approved and the monies are collected through the CIP board, that money is now transferred into the economic fund. And that economic fund has a separate board, which is chaired by the director of finance, is the chairperson. I think the chief economist is on it, and they have 5 people that are prescribed to be on that board. And that monies cannot be used for recurrent expenditure, but for capital expenditure. So one of the things that we are looking to use those monies for are in cases like this, in which we have a catastrophic event and there's need for an immediate capital injection into the fund, into the ministries to make that happen. So again, I think that we would like to maybe amend the economic fund in the future. One, to help with vulnerable homes. We're seeing that the standard of homes is too low. And we'd like to have a program specifically to deal with that. I mean, Minister King didn't speak to it, but in the Castries Basin, the number of septic tanks on the hillsides is a problem, because that's certainly weakening the soil and makes it very vulnerable for landslides. We need to put a massive sewage system in place. So it's either one centralized system or a micro system, meaning smaller sewage plants around the island. That's a significant capital investment, and that's where we could tap into the economic fund to be able to drive that. So the economic fund does become resources available to us. One, to build a sink fund, that we have a reserve of money in case of a catastrophe. But two, to
so
help.
that's where we're looking at to get to at least $500 million?
Correct.
Would that be that fund?
Correct. So over the time, continuing to put monies aside. We've been using part of the airport tax to do that. We were putting in $22 million a year. I think that maybe we've made things look too easy sometimes. I was just showing Minister King that the price of oil is $75. If we allowed the $4 of tax to be added on per gallon, the price at the pump would be in excess of $17. So right now we're only collecting around $2.50 and sometimes less. So here we are with COVID, with a shortage in revenue, still having to subsidize the sector, and we know why we're doing it. The minibus drivers have been limited in the number of passengers. I'm grateful that we've increased it recently, but it's still not full capacity. If in fact we allow the price of gasoline to go up, which means that we either have to allow the prices to go up, which would affect people, or we would have to subsidize the bus drivers. And so we felt right now it's just better to keep the price stable. Airport tax, there's certainly not, we've seen a significant pickup, but it's still 50% of what we had in 2019. Luckily, we did have a sinking fund. That's to fund the loan, and the sinking fund certainly has enough resources in it to carry us through for the next 2 years if we still didn't have any revenue. So that's the importance of these sink funds moving forward. Some people see all this money that's there, and I remember right after COVID, there was this cry to stop the airport projects, take the money out and help. But we knew that you couldn't do that because that would certainly be a breach of the contractual terms that we had. And if in fact the economy recovered, to renegotiate that loan again would have been even more difficult moving forward. So it was just not an option. And that's why I'm saying about building this financial resilience in the country. You know, Cara Chris just gave us a new credit rating about a week ago, in which they basically said no change to our credit rating and a stable outlook, but more importantly, that our current earnings are adequate to maintain the debt that we have. So it's not necessarily how much you borrow, it's whether you have the capacity to service that debt. And we have shown the world that in the most difficult times, that St. Lucia has managed its affairs. And now coming out of COVID, there is a renewed confidence in the country because in those difficult times, we stayed the course. We now need to understand the reason why my government chose the theme, building a new St. Lucia, because what was going on before was not sustainable. And there has to be a significant investment in our infrastructure, our healthcare system, our education system, our social nets, and our financial. And the word resilient applies to all of them. So every day, everything we do is about making it better than it was the day before.
Okay, and just to expand, Prime Minister, on the Cara Chris report, it definitely did speak to that the stable projection really is buoyed on the capital investment, the construction activity taking place, as well as the sort of resurgence, if you will, for the tourism industry.
You know, there was an interesting number. I was watching Bloomberg, my favorite show, and during the COVID, the U.S. Unemployment rate, which was at 3.9%, I think, just before COVID, one of the all-time lows, jumped to 15%. So you're talking almost a 300% increase in unemployment. In the case of St. Lucia, we had brought the unemployment down to 16% during just before COVID. Mm-hmm. In the peak of COVID in 2020, it went to 21%. I think in the first quarter last year, mm-hmm. January to March, it went up to 22%. And it's now come back down significantly. But you're really talking about that we went from 16% to 21%, right? Which is a far cry from what you even saw in the States. That is a result of the strategy of continuing the infrastructure projects. So some of the jobs we saw lost in the hotel sector, by keeping the country open, the retail, wholesale, manufacturers, the farmers, and using monies to buy products from the farmers to help our more vulnerable persons in society, which is something that we're going to continue doing for our fisher folk, our poultry producers, and our fresh crops. That when we did that, along with the construction sector, which employed thousands of people, and we were able to get new investments in our ICT sector, we added almost 2,000 jobs. That is what made the difference. Now, we intend to keep those jobs, and as the hotel sector reopens, adding now back our new jobs. We will come out of this situation even stronger than we were before.
Okay. Prime Minister, I just want to ask you very quickly, as we spoke about the CIP, And you've indicated that we will, moving forward, we are going to be able to use the National Economic Fund to be able to make that money work for the country. Is that to say that before we were not benefiting from CIP funds? Can you clarify that for us?
So we were not benefiting from CIP to that extent. And also, when the then government established the economic fund, they only created it as an act. They never had any regulations with it. And if you remember, we've passed that a new act in Parliament, and that created the economic fund, and now a proper mechanism for the monies to be watched. So initially the monies were going into the consolidated fund, and once they go into the consolidated fund, they were recorded coming in, and any expenditure from the consolidated fund had to be recorded. And so some of those monies were used to be able to bridge the deficit that we had. We're now saying all the money goes in and it cannot be used for any form of recurrent expenditure. And I can say to you that we're learning now that the definition of recurrent expenditure is very narrow. And I think that there has to be some amendment in that in terms of the types of projects that we are talking about. But we are certainly saying during a crisis like this, whether it's COVID, whether it's a hurricane, that capital investment that's required to meet some shortfall. So with the farmers, I consider the initial injection of rebuilding the agricultural sector in terms of replanting the crops, in terms of maybe short-term employment to help clean the farms, the new greenhouses. Those to me are capital investments that the fund should be able to help with once there is a catastrophe, right? So the same way we're saying that we have a state of emergency and what we have to have in place for a state of emergency to call a state of emergency, the same thing would apply. There are international standards to determine if you have a hurricane. So we can't just create a fake event. There has to be an event that would have caused something to take place, and then the funds would become available now to support the reopening of that particular sector.
Okay. Mr. King, I can see a slight smile on your face. Does it mean that you will be looking to make that application to the board of the NEF
at some point? Certainly. I think the fund certainly fits the needs of the country, and particularly in situations like these, when the country finds itself in a state of difficulty where we need resources that are not readily available to be able to make that application. And that in itself is indeed a good initiative.
Okay. Let's speak about the National Integrated Planning and Program Unit, NIP, that Prime Minister alluded to earlier. And that, of course, speaks directly into St. Lucia as its resilient infrastructure. Minister King, does that, our resilience in infrastructure, certainly is not confined to what we may think of our roads and public buildings, but also at the household level as well?
Yes, indeed. I mean, when we speak of infrastructure now, it's a very broad subject. It's not necessarily just the physical infrastructure, but the social infrastructure, whether it's in education, in community development, in equity, in social development. We need to build that resilience. And therefore, for us, it is about dealing with the people, dealing with the landscape in agriculture, dealing with the physical and structural element of the country. And in most of those cases, what I believe is necessary is for us to have some standards and codes in all of those areas so that we can aspire to reach those codes. So for me, in infrastructure, and I speak of physical infrastructure from the Ministry of Infrastructure standpoint, there is definitely a need to have such policies and to develop such codes, because it will not happen overnight unless we have a sustained approach to achieving those objectives. For example, in St. Lucia, we are faced with the challenges of the landscape, the hills and the valleys and the slopes. You speak of slope stabilization, and at the same time you're speaking about in there to be able to manage your utilities underground, but at the same time understanding that there is a potential of the destabilization of your slopes. So how do you do that? Okay. Also, you have to be able to look at the pavement, as I said earlier on, that you're putting in place to make sure that it has sufficient strength to protect that infrastructure. So it's a very broad subject generally, and it's one that we as a nation must take very seriously in developing a very nationalistic program, a policy that is adopted by the country for the infrastructure of the country. And I think that is most important in every regard, whether it's in agriculture. How do you build resilience in agriculture? And the minister said it, the question of insurance. How do you factor in insurance in agriculture? How do we give our farmers that protection and that assurance that come winds and all of your bananas are flattened, that you're likely to get some compensation based on an insurance policy? And that is one that we must look at. We've been speaking about it, and I'm happy to hear the minister speak about continuing in that regard in the coming future.
But Minister King, the other aspect, and going back to the question Lisa asked you, the importance of the DC, the Development Control Authority,
yes,
in ensuring that whatever is being constructed meets minimum requirements. Mm-hmm. And some individuals would not feel too kindly when they are requested to, improve on their designs. But definitely we need to be able to understand that the reason why they have been advised to review the infrastructure that they have presented is in keeping the question of resilience. Mm-hmm. and we have no control over climate change, but what we have control is how we do things to be able to mitigate the negative impacts that we will be experiencing whenever it hits our shores.
Yes, that is a very vexing issue, Minister, you've raised.
We saw the CDC buildings. When I went down there and then I met with the inspectors afterwards, sadly, the screws that were used were too short, the wood was too soft, and therefore it just was not resistant enough to the wind. And I just want to assure the occupants of the CDC that a presentation was made, and we will get the resources available to them by Monday for them to start rebuilding the roofs immediately, because we are in the middle of the rainy season and also the hurricane season. And so we can't sit here and, should we do it, should we not do it? Because the problem is you have buildings, even by the own admission of the persons in the building, the buildings were swaying. These were buildings that were built in 1955 as temporary buildings. And they have, long over fulfilled their use, and I think it's becoming a hazard. But we can't make that decision now, so we've got to go in and fix up their roofs. And we agreed that we would fix it up properly. Mm-hmm. Because again, trying to do it partially, we've seen what happened when we had this one hurricane moving forward. And I just want to say also, on the agriculture, there are some new rules that apply. And I think the word resilience also means adaptability. Mm-hmm. We need to educate our workforce, people in St. Lucia, that if there's changes globally, they can adapt. From a farming perspective, we're seeing that, and when I flew over the helicopter, it was very clear. Everywhere that you had cocoa trees, coconut trees, and other trees interspersed with the bananas, there was much less impact. And certainly using the right type of trees on hillsides to hold the soil, very important. And the whole West Coast Road is going to have that built into it, the slope stabilization component into it. We must do these things. And persons fight the DCA, but that's cutting a corner that will, with these hurricanes coming, which are going to come fast and furious, we have to be adaptable. We have to find now better architectural designs, improved engineering that take into consideration how much people can pay, but at the same time providing people with the safety and protection moving forward. That's the creativity that we're now requiring in this new global world. We have to be thinking out of the box and take many things into consideration. I used the example, long ago you could think 1D, one-dimensional. Then it became two-dimensional, then it became three-dimensional. Well, you know, with the pandemic and climate change, the financial situation, global competitiveness, trying to improve the standard of living of persons, we now find ourselves thinking in 5D and 6D. There's no longer a simple answer anymore to any of these things. And I just want to say to St. Lucia that I'm blessed to have the team of people around me, not only here this evening, but in my cabinet, that rise to that challenge. Nobody's looking to cut any corners, and we're continuously looking to build a better St. Lucia, and a St. Lucia that creates the adaptability and the opportunity for all St. Lucians to prosper.
But I also believe that in resilience, there's an element oftentimes omitted, and that is investment in maintenance. And too often we see infrastructure built without the component of that investment in maintenance. So whether it's routine maintenance, periodic maintenance, scheduled maintenance, whichever way you put it, you need to do those schedule and maintenance programs, investigations. Do you go in and do those investigations? So for example, Prime Minister spoke about screws to soft, material to soft. But it's only if you do those routine inspections that you'll find out that there's a loose sheet, which exacerbates to loosening up everything and whole roof going off. So we must move away from this one-time investment, what I call the capital investment, and support it with the investment in maintenance. I have often said that when a road is built, the program of maintenance starts the day after. So the day after, you need to begin to do these checks. And hence the reason why the government, with the support of the Prime Minister, invested in an asset management program within the Ministry of Infrastructure.
The first budget year.
Yes, the first budget year, which is intended to give us that leverage of being able to assess our bridges, our roads, to detect what is happening. We still need to sharpen it up because we should have seen some of the things that happen. When the road pavement begins to crack and you see alligator cracks, etc., as it is called, something is happening beneath the surface that you need to investigate. And if you really respond to those signs early enough, you can avert possible slope destabilization, landslides, slippages, etc., etc. And we must, again, in setting the standards and the codes in that policy, is to ensure that the investment in maintenance is a key component.
You know, to Minister King's point, and in terms of thinking out of the box and new technology, there is a program that's part of his road maintenance program that includes satellite pictures. So every 8 days, the satellite is taking pictures of the country and can detect, I think it's up to 1 millimeter movement. So if in fact a bridge has moved, it alerts the Ministry of Infrastructure that it's moved. We certainly want to now tie it into the Development Control Authority, that if there's land movement in terms of people cutting down and deforesting an area or preparing a site, automatically they're alerted and DCA knows whether in fact that has approval or it doesn't have approval. This is a very cost-effective way of managing your asset base, but the Minister King is 100% right. When we came into office, that was not what was taking place. We were all reactionary. Everybody comes and tells you about the problems, but nobody tells you what the solutions are. And you're dealing with the urgency or reacting to the urgency rather than actually building a proper maintenance program.
Yeah. I want us to go a little bit deeper, if we can, Prime Minister, on the NIP, the National Integrated Planning and Program Unit, because Minister Ezekiel Joseph just elaborated on my point and the vexing issue of having compliance. And I think that if we are to be moving towards that resilient nation that you so envisage, we have to take the people along with what that idea is, and they need to understand what their role is in all of this. So how will the NIP be able to touch the ordinary St. Lucian into shouldering some of the responsibility in being able to bring this country along on the resilient path?
So NIP is currently in the Ministry of Finance. And the reason why it's in the Ministry of Finance is that when we started the budget process, what we realized again is that people were reacting and not planning. So the Ministry of Education, as an example, was telling us how much money they needed to fix up the schools this year, but nobody was looking 10 and 15 and 20 years down the road. So the goal is to actually plan out solutions. It's only 240 square miles. This is, again, not complicated stuff. And then when you take the rainforest, you take hillsides, you start taking all these areas off, it becomes even a much smaller piece of land that we're going to do. We know what we're vulnerable to. We know that heavy rainfall, and because of the type of soil that we have, that we should limit the amount of building on our hillsides. We know that sea level rising, that down the road it's going to cause a problem. The Minister King's constituency, it shows, I think it's a 3-foot increase in the water level, which is projected to happen in the next 20 years. That VG will become an island. So the international, the regional airport would be cut off. So it would go into Ganters Bay. Cul-de-sac would go all the way back, I think, almost to Mark, where the whole area becomes flooded. So NIP models all of these scenarios out and starts determining where growth is going to take place and helps influence the government's policy. So the need to develop the South was because too many people were migrating up north, and it wasn't the best use of St. Lucia's land space. So now it directed economic policy towards the South, improvement of the road network to reduce the wear and tear. So the Bardell Hill is a clear red flag to everybody that this is extremely vulnerable. So NIP, first and foremost, is a financial model tool that integrates physical infrastructure with planning to make sure that we have a long-term plan in which everybody is coordinated. So what NIP would say to the Ministry of Education is that this is where the population is going to be migrating to. This is where your next school needs to be. It tells the Ministry of Infrastructure, this is where the roads need to go. It tells WASCO, this is where your water needs to go. And it would tell the Ministry of Social Development, it would tell Agriculture, these lands are going to become now urban used, and so you need to start looking for alternative places for farmers. This was very progressive, and I'm looking forward to that being completed. The second thing it's doing is developing smart cities. So Rodney Bay, Castries, Soufriere, and Vieux Fort are the first 4 smart cities we're talking about. And the goal there is the cameras, reducing emissions, improving the quality of life in those areas in terms of pedestrian and vehicular access. So intense planning in all of those 4 places. For instance, in the case of Castries, the idea of having a bus terminal in Choc and a bus terminal in Cul-de-sac. So persons who are coming from the north would go to the terminal in Choc. If you're going south, you would not even go into Castries. You would end up going back through Agar and Trois Pitons. But there would be a shuttle between Choc and town. So now instead of having the buses parked in the middle of town, that you really have shuttles that are taking place and freeing up space that currently is being occupied unproductively. And certainly improve the quality of services for persons. So if I'm going up north, I would take my shuttle to Choc, and then I can go either to Union, or I can go up to Rodney Bay. If in fact I'm going to the south, I can go to Cul-de-sac, and I can either be going down the west coast or be going up the east coast. These are kinds of the interventions that NIP now starts working on because nobody was doing them. We were simply dealing with crisis management every day, and we were continuously behind the 8 ball. So NIP really is a team of people outside of all of us that are looking where St. Lucia is going to go from climate change perspective, SDG goals, improving the quality of life of everybody, better management of our overall resources, and constantly giving the Ministry of Finance a plan moving forward.
We know with the St. Lucia Development Bank, the government has been supporting facilities there where parts of mixed grant and loans soft loans being provided for individuals, even to farmers, as well as to individuals, for them to be able to do repairs to their homes in preparation for storms and so forth with the hurricane season, as well as to make it more resilient. So we know that action is taking place there. I wanted to know, Minister, from your farmers, do you know how much of access they've been utilizing the facilities there at the SLDB?
No, well, to give an accurate indication, the answer is no. I know based on discussion I've had with the leadership of the bank, there have been a number of applications. There have been interest, but as far as the amounts, I would not be in a position to respond to this. But going back to the question of NIP and how we move forward, it calls for a different mindset and discipline also, because there will be a lot of changes, there will be a lot of recommendations, there will be policies that will be coming out of whatever we are doing. And it's for us now to understand and appreciate that we cannot continue doing things the way we are doing it now. Let me give an example. Agricultural lands, where it's zone agriculture. But because of the private individual, what we call land use changes, we see a lot of our agricultural lands going into areas outside of agriculture, and in most cases, these areas cannot be reversed back into agriculture. And what we are realizing now, what we call prime agricultural land is going to other areas. It's for us now, as a ministry, the whole aspect of zoning comes into the picture. But how can you, and I'm referring to the ministry and government, enforce that type of policy when you're dealing with a private individual, and if that private individual is going to tell you, look, as a Mr. Minister, I'm going to get such and such for my land, and you want me to keep it into agriculture, the whole aspect of economics come into play. So the question is, do you want to acquire it because you want it to remain in agriculture? So you see, moving forward is always have situation we have to take on board, and I'm happy to say that we have an opportunity in the case of the Mackey lands, moving forward for government to acquire the Mackey lands, for these lands to be remain in agriculture. So as much as possible, whilst we can come up with policies, we also have to appreciate that there must be a change in the way we think. There must be discipline in what we are doing if these policies are going to redound to our benefit.
So it's a question being able to incentivize individuals, Prime Minister, in order for them, as I said earlier, to be on board with all of those plans.
So again, government's role is to be a facilitator. So part of the problem that we've had, as I said to you, coming out of the hurricanes in Dominica, is even the viability of insurance. I remember the number of discussions taking place at the Chamber and other institutions. Would insurance companies would be able to continue even providing viable insurance? In Dominica, a hotel's insurance went up by almost 300%. So you're talking about the insurance cost became 20% of its operating cost. I mean, that's ridiculous. And it's almost impossible for that to be able to happen. So the idea of building infrastructure in a large part is the role of a facilitator. By building better roads to your home and in your communities, putting in better drains, putting in water, putting in sewage systems, all of these things are doing what? Is strengthening the land around you. And so having DCA standards, we have two very good metal companies here, Caribbean Metals and Bryce, world-class companies providing improved roofs. Remember, after the hurricane in Grenada, 90% of the roofs got blown off. 90%. Because of the technical use. I was speaking to Prime Minister Motley, even in Barbados, the quality of housing is very low. And I think here you have two companies that have made a significant contribution to improving resilience in our country. The more you can reduce the risk, the better it is for insurance. And if it's better for insurance, then banks are prepared to lend you money. So that was a long way to get to your answer, Lissa. But we have to build resilience. We have to improve the overall infrastructure to allow insurance companies to be more viable. And in making insurance companies more viable allows the commercial banks to be more viable. More stability that we can create in the economy. That means that bank loans become more secure. The interest rates come down and the bank's willingness to invest. So in the case of the farmers, what were we seeing? Farmers had no coordination. There's a limited demand. But persons were out of income this month and just took it upon themselves to grow. And because nobody had fixed markets, that everybody would end up down at the Castries market or one of the other markets in St. Lucia. And the horror story began. Andre Chasney, when he was at CFL, did an amazing job of adopting farmers. Massey has taken it now to another level. The new marketing board now and the 7 crops that the Ministry of Agriculture are undertaking are critical, because we're saying, here's the crops, we're going to evaluate the performance of the farmers, we're going to give them the level of support to encourage the banks to lend them money. Because the banks now will know, is this a good farmer? Does he have a contract? And the good farmer is whether he's able to produce and deliver the product of quality at the price. Because ultimately that's what the bank wants to know. We're doing the same thing with village tourism. We're saying we want to see more solutions get involved in the tourism. So we're going to create a mechanism to handhold St. Lucians who want to get involved in that business, to bring more security to the business, which now makes lending money more viable. And banks are significant contributors to our economy. In one, persons who put their money into a savings account, that they can get a return on that savings. 2, the bank is employing people. 3, that the bank now is lending money to allow the productivity and the output of our country to be able to grow. And government now, through good taxation policies, good rule of law in terms of contracts, as well as good infrastructure in reducing the peaks and troughs of disasters, is what we need to do. And we understand very well that that's our role. And sometimes, well, I shouldn't say sometimes, always, when we become invisible, that's when you're doing the best job. When people don't even feel like you're there because you're anticipating all of the problems and you're solving those problems early enough, and so therefore people don't have the need to hear or see you, that's when we truly become incredibly successful. And this is why we want to focus on improving the minimum standard of living in this country. The 5 for 5 program that we have launched, specifically on healthcare insurance, unemployment insurance, and more importantly, support for the needy in a better targeted social net program with food and income support for those persons who are unemployed. This is all about building resilience in our economy, building stability in our economy, so that even if you've had a COVID, that persons would have continued to be paid their money. If government had a reserve fund, we would not have had to go into debt, and we would have been able to continue business as usual in the government. That is what the issue of resilience is all about. Adaptability and sensible policies to allow you to move forward.
All right, thank you very much for that, Prime Minister. And as we come to our closing moments, I want to go across to Minister King, and first for him to give us just his closing thoughts on the passage of Elsa, the lessons that we've learned there, and how the ministry, looking back on all what you've done in the last 5 years, where you took the ministry from in terms of our infrastructure, physical infrastructure, where we are at today, and how that is going to buoy us moving forward.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Let me first state that the country's infrastructure, that's road infrastructure, is about 1,000 kilometers of road. There are 700 kilometers of road that you speak of primary, secondary, tertiary, and 300 kilometers that's what I call roads that are outside of major communities. Our road program, RIMP4, has certainly assisted in improving the road network in St. Lucia, but it's only about 10% of the overall road infrastructure in terms of your stock, your road stock. We believe that it has to be an ongoing program. In fact, RIMP4 is the fourth program of RIMP dating back when. That has helped to improve the road infrastructure, but it must be a continuous effort to augment the deficit of our road conditions. But most importantly is for the ministry to maintain its road maintenance management system, not merely by saying we're maintaining roads, but programming road repairs, programming road maintenance, programming road rehabilitation and reconstruction, so that once you build a pavement of a strength of 20 years or 25 years, you ought to be in a position after 5 years to protract the life expectancy, if I should use that term, or the pavement strength for another 5 years and reduce the cost of maintenance in the long term. That must be done. We started in 2017 a program called the Pre-Hurricane Program, which was new. Before that, you had a desilting program, which certainly assisted in desilting your rivers and ravines. Of course, desilting is good in that it is intended to extract the debris and what have you down in the riverbed. But it's not intended to erode the riverbed to the extent that you lose the necessary traction that is needed there to slow down the pace of your water. And therefore, what we have done is to say, let us do the pre-hurricane program. What has to happen now, I believe, Prime Minister, is to reschedule that pre-hurricane program, because really and truly, we are now actually implementing the program, and the hurricane season is on us. So there's a need to look at the pre-hurricane program and to see whether it isn't better to have that pre-hurricane season program in your fourth quarter, which is the last quarter, and then your desilting program in the first quarter. So by then you'd have done all the unblocking of drains and culverts and overhanging trees. And that's the other thing. We also introduced a program of clearing the overhanging branches. Last year and this year we didn't do it. Okay?
But it was very telling.
And it was very telling, as you saw a lot of top branches, falling down and causing a lot of destruction and interruption in the movement of traffic and people generally. So we have learned a lot. We are going to revisit some of our actions and our programming, and to hope that we can preempt a lot of what we saw happening. The need for trimming of trees and cutting of branches and overhanging branches, working in collaboration with Lucia, the utility company, and others, to make sure that we create an environment that will allow us to sail through the hurricane season without much disruption.
Thank you very much there for that. And that's one of the things we were talking about in studio, is that this time around with Elsa, what we saw, the damage, especially for Lucia, all of those trees falling on the lines, and that really accounted for me not having electricity for something like 2 days. Just saying. Yes, Prime Minister.
I just want to say in closing, if I can, I want to reinforce some of the things that we said, particularly about Elsa. One, instructions have been given to the Ministry of Housing to move very swiftly to replace the roof at CDC buildings. So that's going to start on Monday. Two, that we will find resources to help support the farmers. So I don't want the farmers to believe in any way that there's any question. I think what the minister was making reference to is to exactly what those interventions are going to be. We have the example of Kurt, of some of the things that we have done. We believe there may be need of some additional interventions and different types of interventions. We know that the fertilizer is one of them. Certainly whether in fact we're going to give some labor support and how that mechanism would work if necessary. So from a farmer, from a banana growers and also plantain growers, there is going to be an intervention. I think that, I know that we will find resources or some mechanism to deal with the greenhouses that have been lost once the full assessment has been established. But I certainly want to let the farmers know in all constituencies that the government will make resources available once the Ministry of Agriculture finalizes the plans. But there will be an immediate intervention, and we fully believe in the banana sector. As the minister indicated, with NFTO now being strengthened, the response that we're getting in the UK market, we were just again on the verge of launching a major marketing initiative for bananas with Export St. Lucia, a very exciting program both domestically and internationally. So we remain absolutely committed to that sector. And certainly the tree crops with cocoa and some of the other types of tree crops, as the minister indicated, we need to move at a faster pace because we now know that that's going to work very well moving down in the future. So I just really want to emphasize to everyone, just in case there was any misconception, the government is not hesitating to support our farmers in this particularly difficult period. And despite our own financial constraints, this is too important of a sector, and that also applies to the fisher folk as well. Again, I can't say to you tonight how much and how. I have to wait for those details from the ministry, but I give them the assurances, as we did in the meeting yesterday, that the Ministry of Finance will find those resources from somewhere to be able to make an immediate intervention. And lastly but not least, individual households, the Ministry of Equity will be working with many of the vulnerable persons in our society who have lost roofs, whose houses have been further compromised, to do a very quick assessment and for us to be able to provide some immediate relief to those persons, because we recognize we're still in the middle of our hurricane season and we have to move quickly with those persons.
All right, Minister Joseph, I'll give you a minute to wrap up.
Well, thank you very much for allowing me to be here to discuss the situation as it pertains to agriculture and the impact of Elsa. Like you heard from the Honorable Prime Minister, definitely the resources will be made available. We understand we were not in a very comfortable situation financially because, of course, the impact of COVID, but I'm sure that with the support of my technical team, we'll be able to come up with some indication as to how we believe we can support our farmers, our fishermen, and all those involved in the agricultural sector to advance or to continue being engaged in that sector. I'm happy to hear that we also will look at the whole aspect of those individuals who have lost their homes, their roofs, because that's important. And then I would have want to at least make a plea on their behalf. And if I can speak of my situation in Babonneau, right? A number of persons in Babonneau lost their roof. So
including you, Minister?
Sorry?
Did you lose yours as well?
Yeah, well, mine went. Yes, unfortunate. So I'm happy to hear that some support will be given through the Ministry of Equity as it pertains to this. When you look at what we did for during Tropical Storm Kirk, now we're not talking about tropical storm, we're talking about a hurricane, so the impact is even more severe. We give support as it pertains to inputs. We give financial support to our farmers, and not only for the banana farmers, we go to farmers, because now we're talking about farmers. We give support to our fishermen. So definitely, again, it's my responsibility with the support of my technical team to put a program in place to approach the Minister of Finance, and that I will do. And as soon as we can finalize what is it that we are able to, with the limited resources that we have, we as a ministry will articulate to our farmers and to the stakeholders in the sector what is it that we are going to support them with. If you just allow me, Lisa, to say a few words in Creole, because we have been speaking about agriculture, and agriculture is severely affected. One is that also we are parler about impact la hurricane a fait agricole. Et puis on a assuré that farmers need confiance là that gouvernement Florboa en bas leadership Alan Chasney qui continue à supporter farmers, because nous avons fait avant, c'est pas la première fois nous avons fait, nous fait le tropical storm qui est passé, nous avons support pour farmers et puis tous les gens qui sont involvés en affaires agricoles. Encore, au soir, autant honorable Prime Minister dit, c'est attention au gouvernement, c'est attention pour bailler support, mais c'est responsabilité du ministre agricole pour faire un programme à ce qui manière nous que le gouvernement ça supporter. Si nous avons fait tout ça, nous avons fait ça demain, comme ministre, nous avons joindre demain pour discuter qui manière nous pouvons assister au secteur. Mais nous pouvons comprendre que là nous avons expérimenté tropical storm cut, situation financière au pays a parti actuellement. Nous avons sorti from COVID et puis les affaires resources are limited. So I see that Premier Minister Alan Chasley qui basé sur discussion nous avons demain, nous avons ça venir puis un package qui a ça va support pour tout le monde en secteur. Moi aussi je dire that ces gens qui peut Lucia qui a un support, of course, you can go parler et puis représentative et puis pour ça information ça venir ministre equity, so ministre equity qui a fait representation pour Premier ministre là et puis nous avons ça supporter you. The reality is we cannot continue doing things the way we're doing it. We have to build resilience. We have to, and it's for us now to continue discussing with the respective entities how we can accomplish this. I can tell you that just on Thursday we met to discuss plans moving forward as it pertains to the agricultural sector. We met with the government of Taiwan through this embassy here, and we had started putting a program in place, looking at the whole question of new technology, looking at the whole aspect of resilience. We're moving from the 7 crops to look at 3 crops, because we think 3 crops is critical for as far as building resilience. So we are going to continue that discussion, and it's a program we want to start sometime this year. So I can inform our farmers that as a government we will continue to give the support that we would like to. Of course, resources is critical, but we have to stay strong and continue doing the work that they are doing in feeding our nation. Thank you.
I want to thank all of you. I want to thank the Minister for Infrastructure, Ports, Energy and Labour as well, Honourable Stevenson King. I want to say thank you very much to the Minister for Agriculture, Honourable Ezekiel Joseph, and to Prime Minister, Honourable Alan Chasney, as we were giving you an update there post Hurricane Elsa, but more than that, we were discussing St. Lucia's resilience and how we're going to get there. Sometimes it can be a difficult, uncomfortable decision because it requires some hard talk sometimes. But we want to thank you as we begin this discussion. And I'm sure there'll be many other discussions to have along those lines in the coming weeks and months. All that's left for me to inform you is that just the update coming from Lucia. Lucia has informed that 99% of customers are following the passage of Hurricane Elsa. They are now receiving service. All the high tension repair and restoration works have been completed. So that's good news coming out from Lucia there. Also, to just wrap up, to tell you that the agriculture sector suffered the most damage there post Elsa. And we're looking, the preliminary assessments are that 75 to 80% of the banana industry was severely impacted, and that level of damage varies from region to region. And we're looking at an overall figure there of some $36 million in the preliminary assessment. And as I indicated, we here at the GIS will be bringing you much more on St. Lucia post Hurricane Elsa and the work that is taken to ensure that St. Lucia is a resilient nation. I am Lisa Joseph. Thank you to our media partners for joining us. See you next time.